Question 4. I'm agnostic. Can you prove the existence of God? Agnostics fall somewhere in the middle of absolute theism and absolute atheism. They say that it's possible that God is out there, but that they just haven't seen enough evidence to be convinced. Could we ever get to the point where we could make a confident judgment one way or the other? How could anybody possibly prove God exists? Isn't it arrogant to claim to have the truth? Millions of people wrestle with these very reasonable questions. Luckily, there's some action steps we can take to draw a verdict one way or the other. So, where would we even begin? Rather than simply tell you what to believe, we'll explore some effective ways of how to think and where to even begin. What exactly does the question mean when it asks if someone can prove God exists? The technical definition of proof says that we can know something with 100% certainty. Just about any intro to philosophy course shows that it's technically just about impossible to prove that anything exists. For example, to prove that you yourself exist, you would have to rely on, number 1, your own memory, and number 2, your own logical mind, both of which can't be objectively proven themselves. You see where the problem is. This brings us to what we'll call the practical definition of proof, which is much more realistic. Consider this illustration. Imagine you're the judge of a trial where someone has been accused of robbing a bank. Here's the evidence that's been presented to you so far. Texts and emails show the man was planning to rob the bank. The man's car was spotted at the bank during the robbery. There's security camera footage of the man robbing the bank. His fingerprints are all over the door of the bank safe. The stolen money was uncovered from the man's house. And lastly, multiple eyewitnesses attest to each of these events. Now, an objective judge would have no problem whatsoever with convicting this man of the crime. In legal terms, we would say that the man can be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. But then, the man's lawyer stands up to present his defense. Without introducing any new evidence, the lawyer simply argues that, technically, there's no way to prove that the defendant was the one actually sending the texts from his own phone. And technically, the man could have just coincidentally parked his car at the bank to go for a walk. And technically, the security camera footage could have been edited with CGI to make it appear to be the man. And maybe the police lied about finding the fingerprints on the bank safe. And maybe the defendant just happened to have laying around his house the exact amount of cash that was taken from the bank that day. And lastly, all of the eyewitnesses could have just been mistaken. So the question is, can we prove with absolute 100% certainty that these alternative explanations aren't true? Technically speaking, no. However, any reasonable judge taking an objective look at the evidence tells us with the utmost certainty that the man did, in fact, rob the bank. In theory, the same line of reasoning could be used in the case for or against God. The question is a matter of evidence. Most people generally demand two types of evidence for any belief of significance. On one hand, we need intellectual, tangible information that points to a specific conclusion. Without this objective, academic evidence, we'll eventually doubt if our beliefs are just the result of bias, blind faith. On the other hand, head knowledge can only take us so far. Knowing the truth isn't nearly as significant as experiencing the truth firsthand. Most people demand, and rightfully so, what we'll call experiential evidence. Between the informational and the experiential, we find our best chance of getting the proof we're looking for. Since there's simply not enough time to try out every one of the thousands of religions that have come about, we've got to start with the informational side of things to begin to sort through the false beliefs. Does history point to the existence of God? History is one of the most straightforward aspects of the academic side of the evidence. Most religions contain a record of past events. So, is there good reason to believe that these events actually happened? Written history immediately calls into question a multitude of religions. If secular accounts of the past repeatedly contradict what the religion claims, we should begin to be skeptical of its truthfulness. Archaeology is another branch of history that's able to provide physical evidence of historical accounts. A total absence of archaeological evidence doesn't necessarily prove that something didn't happen. However, if a belief is rooted in history, we would hope to see at least some historical writings and some archaeology to back it up. Do supernatural things happen today? If so, where's the proof? Well, if we're talking supernatural, we'd have to break it into two categories: beneficial, miraculous occurrences, and detrimental, satanic, demonic occurrences. Sadly, this crucial line of evidence is something the cynical observer is inclined to overlook in its entirety. As we'll discuss in future videos, the documented, published evidence for the miraculous is astounding. For now, here's just two examples. We first look to Dr. Craig Keener. Keener's work shows that surveys from 10 different countries suggest that about 202 million people claim to have witnessed divine healing. He spends over 300 pages in one of his books sharing modern testimonies of eyewitness accounts of the miraculous. Our second example comes from the Global Medical Research Institute. They publish reports in peer-reviewed medical journals. Their studies include medical documentation both before and after the unexplainable, allegedly miraculous healings. On the darker side of things, evidence of satanic or demonic activity would speak into God's existence in an equally powerful way. One expert has this to say: "It's true that certain fundamentalist religious people are going to misinterpret psychiatric problems or other medical problems as possession. Pretty much all religions and all cultures have seen cases of possession. It doesn't in any way depend on the particular religious tradition, nor does it even depend on a person's belief or disbelief in God. Many people think the possessed are just mentally ill. There's a real difference. As I often say to people, mentally ill people can't all of a sudden speak foreign languages. They don't exhibit levitation. They don't have superhuman strength. They don't have psychic abilities enabling them to reveal information called hidden knowledge. All of these symptoms are a good indication that there's a separate creature involved." Another expert says this: "Though belief in possession has been rejected as superstition, the phenomenon of demonic possession is a psychic fact and necessarily should be approached as such. The way to distinguish these mental illnesses from demonic activity will be by viewing the whole spectrum of symptoms exhibited. What we have found is that demonic possession is a unique syndrome comprised of signs and symptoms that are different from the signs and symptoms that constitute any of the psychotic syndromes." And another has this to say: "The great majority of complaints from people are based on misunderstandings, medical illness or mental illness. Schizophrenia doesn't make you suddenly fluent in ancient languages. Epilepsy doesn't make you suddenly know the details of secret sins of people in the room. Does science point to the existence of God? Let's take a brief look at the natural sciences. The cosmological argument says, things that begin are caused. Science shows that our physical universe began, therefore the cause can't be natural or physical. Since science suggests that space, time, and matter had a beginning, whatever caused those things to exist had to be outside of space, time, and matter. Next, let's take a brief look at the teleological argument, aka the argument from intelligent design. This argument is often dismissed entirely as religious nonsense. In reality, both theistic and atheistic scientists alike are beginning to come to the same conclusions. Here's just one example of how the conversation has been going in recent years. Ben Stein made a documentary highlighting the suppression of intelligent design theory in higher education. He includes interviews with both Stephen Meyer, author of Signature in the Cell, and leading atheist Richard Dawkins, author of The God Delusion. Meyer is a Cambridge graduate who makes purely scientific arguments that genetic origination and development cannot be explained by natural means. When confronted with these ideas, Dawkins had this to say in his interview with Ben Stein: "Intelligent design people are not genuine scientists." "Then how did it get created?" said Stein. "Nobody knows how it got started," said Dawkins. To which Stein quickly replied, "So you have no idea how it started?" Dawkins responded, "No, nor has anybody." When pressed further about how life may have originated on Earth, he had this to say: "It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved to a very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto, perhaps, this planet. Now that is a possibility, and an intriguing possibility. If you look at the detail of biochemistry, molecular biology, you might find a signature of some sort of a designer." Here's the point. Ideas like the ontological argument and intelligent design should not be dismissed simply because they come with certain stigmas. When alternative theories have to go to extremes, such as crediting aliens for our very existence, it's best to stick with examining the evidence for ourselves. If the evidence were to strongly favor one belief beyond all others, we should probably think about putting its claims to the test. If the evidence led me there, how could I experience God for myself? These experiences could come in a number of different ways. In theory, it could start with a genuine prayer. For others, it might just be talking to people who already hold this belief. You might gain experience from seeing how this belief is practiced in different places throughout the world. You might have to ask yourself, are the objections to this belief coming from my heart or from my mind? And lastly, always be learning, ready to put your beliefs to the test. The goal of this video was not to show you what to think, but how to think, and where to begin. The resources mentioned in this video are designed to introduce you to the various fields of study. The onus is on you to pursue the evidence for yourself. Back to our illustration. What if some of the evidence did in fact point to God? Just some probably wouldn't be enough. Initial doubts could easily extinguish the first handful of leads. But if we are genuinely pursuing the truth, and if the evidence were to keep on growing and growing, at what point would it be too great to ignore? Here are just a few helpful resources that were mentioned in this episode. It's more important now than ever to be able to think critically for yourself.